All right. Good to see everyone. We are back. I don't know for how long, but at least for a bit. Oh man. We're still trying to make our way through the flatting process here. Well, color process. Yeah, actually, I'm going to. That's so irritating. I'm not too concerned about the fact that the pants are blending in, because when it gets to lighting, that won't be as much as a problem. So I'm going to actually leave that. And I've elected to do the backgrounds in another pass, just cause. So we're just gonna be doing the flat color. And then we'll go back in and do this another time. It does mean that we're still going to do this, but this should go fairly quickly, hopefully. Hey, how's it going, Richard? Good to see you. I do appreciate that. And that they're like button hit. Especially considering I never think to mention it. Okay, so now I have some decisions to make. What color do I want to go for pipes? Let's try to figure that out. That. Yeah. And then this would be more of a kind of coppery tone. Yeah, okay. Okay, we need to do the blemishes, and the blemishes actually on this are actually her skin, or her previous skin tone coming through. Yeah, she's covered her skin with something to block the sun. The idea. That would be in this page. Okay. There's a couple things about this pose in particular I'm still not terribly happy about, but go with it regardless. And for now, this is the same color as his poncho. Probably an old one. Kind of tattered, dilapidated. Hand me down. That'll change. Okay. So oh, forgot his extra finger. All right. Um, I'll need to go grab his hat. More coloring indeed. And we're gonna be doing a lot more coloring. So it's gotta be a little while. Yeah. Unfortunately. but it's important. Let's grab this. Let's grab this. I should be able to get a bit done today. Hopefully. Some of the panels should get a little bit simpler, like this panel. This panel isn't too bad. These two shouldn't be too bad. So as time goes on, the next few pages should be a lot easier, which will be nice. So I was hoping to have a bit more done by now, but didn't happen. No. Yep. Okay. Nice thing is I already have all this stuff kind of mapped out. So we should be able to just go back here, pull colors here. Oops. Okay. Guess I can figure out the rug's color. Trapezoids keep bugging me how low offered it all is. Well, unfortunately, it's interesting that you picked up on that, because you're right in that there is a shape language, especially nowadays. I would argue that there was a bit more distinction back in the day. It depended on the budget and everything like that, but unfortunately, Japan is extremely comfortable with conformity to style. And so when Japan went digital, their whole goal was, well, now we can make everything perfect, right? We can have perfect gradients, we can have perfect whatnots, right? There are some places that are like artistically going against that. There's a background studio that still works traditionally, and their backgrounds are freaking fantastic. So there are things in places in Japan that are very like artistically driven, but so much of the industry is predicated on speed to such a degree that it's like, well, let's just standardize everything. Let's just make everything really, really, really fast, right? Because the demand is now outstripping the pace, right? This kind of, and honestly, it's kind of an arbitrary demand. It's one that like even people in the industry are looking at, they're going, geez, like, do people watch all of this? You know, it's kind of crazy. So probably, unfortunately, what you're seeing is part of that result is what a lot of people kind of call same face syndrome and whatnot, which I think is worse than it's ever been. Just because they don't have time. They just don't have time to do anything different. They already run behind budget. To give you an idea, I was blown away when I learned this. So there's all these jokes about Demon Slayer, where it's like, oh man, like the animation's like what was like Jeff Bezos, you know, funding it and everything like that. And then you actually look at the budget for those episodes, and I want to say it was like $87,000 American dollars, like US dollars, per episode. Now, I could be wrong with that figure. Like, maybe I'm misinterpreting something. Maybe that was like just one facet of the production, but it seemed like it was like, okay, that's like the budget per episode. And either way, like, you know, they're not making good money, right? And it's such an extreme demand for like that series and just the industry as a whole. It's pretty bad right now, honestly. So my hope is that down the line things will change for the better for that industry. But I don't know. Like, there were some really good videos I watched recently, so that's why it's kind of been on my mind as of late. These ideas and stuff, because it's crazy. Like, it's just kind of wild. The level that these guys are asked to work on. And unfortunately, ultimately, what you see is because it's so quick, it becomes sloppy, it becomes less interesting, right? It's why whenever anyone's like, oh man, like, Japan's like kicking America's butt at entertainment, it's like, yeah, but that's not a very good metric, because at the end of the day, they're hurting too, like really bad, right? That their industry is not something we should be like looking at and going, oh yeah, that's what we need to do, right? Like, maybe in certain parts, right? Sure, like there is a lot of really good artistry that comes out of it, regardless. But in the way that it's set up, yeah, I guess from a mindless consumer kind of standpoint, sure. But artistically, sustainability wise, I don't know. I don't know about that. I don't think that's the direction we want to go. That's not exactly a healthy direction. So. Why things are starting to abandon quickly too. Yeah. Well, the interesting thing about it is they've been working, from as far as I know, they've been working on a bi-weekly schedule, or not bi-weekly, but by the week, right? Every week for since the 60s. Keep in mind, if you go back in and check out series from the 60s, like 8-Man, the original Astro Boy, friggin' the original Dororo, or like Speed Racer, right? It's vastly different, right? Vastly different production pipeline, vastly different timeline. Much simpler, even though it's you don't have as many digital tools and stuff like that. They still do a lot of stuff on paper, regardless, over in Japan and other countries. The animation process and such, cleanup and whatnot has adapted quite a bit, but the animation process, for the most part, a lot of it's still done on paper, layouts and such. In-betweening is digital, and like I said, cleanup, but like still, right? And so like you're only gonna speed up so much, the process so much, especially as the demand goes up through technology within those styles, right? And it's just like, okay, so they're still working more or less, and with inflation and stuff like that adjusted, but more or less they're still working with budgets that you would have seen back in the 60s for production that is way higher. It was way more demanding, and it's like, dang, like that's concerning, you know. That doesn't seem sustainable. So yeah, it's a little interesting. So that's where you're getting a lot of this kind of same face syndrome kind of stuff and everything. Yeah, I can't remember the name of the video. It's something along the lines of like how this series exposed a $28 billion industry or something like that. And yeah, it's a good watch. I think it's a really good watch, because it kind of shows, okay, this is how it works, right? And it really kind of shines the light on, hey, you know, these series that stop, a good amount of them is because the artist just can't continue, for like health reasons and like whatnot, right? We'll see, actually, in regards to the AI or the anime industry. they might start catering to AI. I know some game studios are going to be doing that, and yeah, it's just going to be for the sake of just turning stuff out, right? Which is my biggest argument against AI. It's like, if that is your goal, we don't need more of that. Especially like it's only logical if it's a corporation. It's like, okay, you're just, you know, feeding the bottom line, right? Like, you're doing what you do. But it kind of bothers me that it's like indie creators are just like, oh yeah, this is the way, you know? It's like you're trying to compete in a method like similar to these corporations while you're trying to break away from these corporations. Like, it doesn't make sense to me. It's like, you know, just make simpler art if you have to. At least it will be art. That's my thought anyway. You know, I'm not going to argue that my art is like some perfectly rendered, no mistakes kind of thing, but that's why I do it this way, right? Is I want people to appreciate the fingerprints of the artwork, as it were. You know, what I've talked about. And yeah, sometimes I wish it was a little stronger, a little better, but the method behind that isn't to just give up and be like, oh well, I'll just take the easier route, you know. And the art will follow, yeah. Or product, I guess I would call it product, right? Because it's all art, right? You just have art that's interesting, and then you have the art that's not interesting, right? Sure, I'll call it art. It's really crappy art, in my opinion. It's boring. I'm bored, but too unsustainable, yeah. But yeah, it'll be interesting. I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen to the anime industry. But I think there's going to be some people who are in for a rude awakening eventually, when it's like when the industry, I mean, I won't even definitively say that it will collapse, because I don't know what that would look like. I mean, it's big for Japan, like what they do with it and everything like that. So I don't even know, like, I don't know what's gonna happen. All I do know is that something is gonna change. And honestly, the biggest, the most likely thing is, honestly, what we did, America did back in the 90s, I guess, and that's ship it overseas. That's what they're already doing right now. They call them, oh gosh, what do they call it? Gaijin something. But it's basically foreign workers, right? So they're outsourcing to places like China and South Korea and whatnot, but like even more, because they were already doing that, but they're like really doing it, right? I know people even in the States who work on like anime series and stuff like that. And oh my word, I do not envy them, because as cool as it is as an opportunity and everything like that, just the work demand is just, man, it's good grief. It has me concerned for some people, to be honest, their health. But you know, they're doing their thing. So, but yeah, a little sketchy. I don't know. This is gonna be a very brown comic, isn't it? Makes sense. It's in the desert. That's why. But I'll try to throw in some color with the light. Trying to bring back some color. There we go. That didn't take too long. All right. Okay, now I need some outside reference of the ship. There we go. Okay. Actually, that might be interesting. Although that, okay. As the bubble will burst? Yeah, probably. Yeah, I could see that happening. It is extremely lucrative right now. And as that, you know, eventually stuff like that has a tendency to just collapse. Or not collapse, but burst, like you said. We'll see. It's really interesting though, because in that video we talked about earlier, people like Miyazaki and a lot of other like old school, like people who've been in the industry for a long time, are talked to and talked about in like certain about certain things, and it's crazy how far back the story goes. You know, like I said about like it going back to like the 60s and stuff like that. Well, the strife of you know, the layout of the industry, that's as far back as it goes, and a lot of those old school people were involved in the early days, trying to figure out how do we do this sustainably. Yeah, that's crazy, right? Very interesting history there. It was a lot of history I wasn't aware of as an animator. Because I'm not terribly familiar with the industry, with the Japanese industry. I'm slightly more familiar with like the American industry, less so with the European industry as well. I know a little bit of like the Eastern European, some things that went on in like Russia or other places, but not a whole lot in terms of the industry. But yeah, so it was very interesting. I actually have a book on the history of animation. That's where I learned a lot of like the early stuff. It was a really neat book that talked about a variety of different places. It wasn't just America or any one place, which was really cool because I learned a bit about like just what was going on in other places. What were they doing with animation? I got to the 60s. Actually, funny enough, ironically enough, I got to the 60s in that book, And for me, I'm not really a big fan of 60s animation, generally speaking. Specifically Western 60s animation, because that's when they started getting really cheap, because they had to for television and whatnot. And so you got kind of the UPA style, and that has like charm to it in and of itself. And there's some fun series that came out of that. But it's not terribly interesting to me. Even from a historical point of view. It's kind of funny because there was so much happening at that time. That's when Disney entered the Xerox era and, was really struggling. That's when Hanna-Barbera were up and coming in television and were kind of setting the standard for television animation for decades to come, until it was essentially reinvented in the late 80s, early 90s. So there was a lot going on, but it just, I don't know, there's something about it that just, particularly at the time when I was younger, I didn't care for, so I kind of stopped there. So I have pretty good knowledge up until about the 60s. Well, I find that really interesting, actually, last name, that I was able to present it in a way that made sense to you. Because I, like, listening to the way you were talking, I knew that you were more on the same page than I think you realized at the time. And ultimately, I think most everyone is, to be honest, in regards to what art is, right? And it's like, well, yeah, you do want the human element to art, right? You don't necessarily want to leave that behind, right? And again, my argument isn't so much that it's like, oh, this one tool, like, oh, I don't like that tool. It's, you need to be careful of the tools that you use. And that goes for, like, I got to thinking about this, that goes for even traditional methods of art. It's not like painting with a brush is distinctly absent of those pitfalls. And the way, so I was like, okay, so how would you measure it then? Like, what's the kind of definition we're looking at? And the conclusion I began to draw was, when you let the tool do all the work, you wind up with modern art. In the derogatory sense of the term, right? Like, oh, modern art, right? Something, to give a bit more of a definition of that, something that doesn't actually, that is superficial to its nature as art. In the case of modern art, it's so that you can money launder, right? At least that's one of the reasons, right? It has some superficial aspect to it, status, whatever, right? And you can do that with traditional art. So you take the brush and you flick it at the thing a little bit, and you just, when you're letting the tool do all the work, as it were, then what are you bringing to it, right? That's kind of the question that you have to ask. Same thing can go with digital art. If you're just kind of trend hopping with your digital tools, and it's just like, oh, I'm just going to do this technique. Yeah, you might fit something in there, but if you're not careful, if you're just doing the basic root of that tool, there's not much there, right? Now, I'm not going to go so far as to say it's not art, but I will say that it's very boring, right? And it's the same thing with AI. It's like, well, what are you bringing to the table with it? Yeah, right. So, and like I said, I think that ultimately it is the, where is it? I think most people fall into that category where they don't want to necessarily abandon the artistry. It's just kind of, from some of the people I've seen, it's sort of a desperation. It's this fear of, I guess it's the kind of feeling that every artist has, but maybe not everyone realizes it. where it's like you're afraid that you're not going to be good enough kind of thing. It's as kind of simple and juvenile as that to some degree, I guess. And so when this convenience comes along, it's like, oh, well, I can just use that. And funny enough, I was in that mentality as well. When I started digital art, my goal wasn't to be an artist, right? I just, it was like, oh, well, this is a chance to get some ideas out, right? And like, that's fair enough. But what I really slowly began to realize is like, wait a minute, hold on. If I'm going to do this, I need to know my stuff. I need to actually have a foundation. And thankfully, you know, people like my brother who understands it, he comes from much more of a, I guess you could call it traditional background, classical background in terms of just his foundations. Not necessarily in the kind of art he does, but just his approach, I would say. That insight was given to me, thankfully, because and then as well as other people I met, and it really began to unlock a new world. And like, here's the thing, like the other argument is, oh, well, I don't have to, oops, that's the wrong color actually. I don't have 10 years to dedicate to a craft. It's like, okay, then you're going to be missing a whole lot, right? Or more correctly, you don't need 10 years to wrap your head around the foundations and the basics. You really don't, right? Even if you're a busy person. Now, if you want to like just hone and perfect that craft, yeah, I mean, like, more time the better, right? But to get a basic lay of the land and the structure and the ideas and stuff like that, you'd be surprised at how quickly, if you're dedicated, how quickly you can make something happen, right? And regardless of whether you use AI or not, I don't really care. Chances are, if you don't have that foundation, you're working at a distinct disadvantage and you don't even really realize it. You don't know what you don't know, right? And the same thing goes for any other tool, right? It goes for freaking painting with a brush. If you don't know those foundations that everyone is built on, you say, well, I'm just gonna do my own thing. Like, you can do that. Like, I don't really care, right? If you want to just screw around and paint to Bob Ross and whatnot, that's perfectly fine. But there's a whole other side to it. There's a whole other world that just really opens up when you just take that extra step. And that's what's important. That's the important step, right? So that's why I'm not like no AI, blah 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 blah. Aside from, you know, maybe there's other concerns with it, like, I mean, scraping art and stuff like that. Like, I don't think that's cool. But the tools aren't really threatening to me, as it were. But the way I look at it, they're threatening to you if you want to take that next step, right? That's going to hold you back for years. Imposter syndrome. Yeah, exactly, right? Like, well, now I can do this, right? And it's this convenience, it's this enticing convenience. And yeah, you need to be careful of that. Michelangelo, who were all about the result itself and having the message or story spring from that. Yeah, exactly. Well, and the experience, like I talked about, the experience, right? That's what I want people to have with my work, because it's not going to be the best, right? My artwork, there are things I wish I was better at, but what I do have, what I can provide, is a very unique experience. That's what I've really learned through this project. I don't have to run it through an AI to conform it to some standard, right? You don't have to do that. In fact, that's the true benefit of indie art, right? Is you will get something different, hopefully. So yeah, that's what I always encourage. Mashing words together, yeah. And I mean, I'll say, like I've said, if good tools come of it, like, I mean, I don't want to have to sit there and color every single frame in, for an animation, right? If a computer can help me do that, awesome. That's really cool, right? Like, that's an awesome tool. Tools are great, right? I love tools. But it's a matter of having that control, right? It's the difference between running something through a computer to upscale it to 60 frames per second versus having a tool that you can go in and work with to get the in-betweens the way you want it, right? Who knows? Maybe 60 frames per second animation is in the cards for the future of animation. But we really shouldn't have it just cram it through a machine and disregard any kind of foundation so that, ooh, monkey brain goes smooth, you know? like that's, no. We don't want that. You guys, you don't want that. It's a neat little experiment sometimes just to see what happens. Like, oh, that's weird. No. I want people to realize and understand, and because I think they can, I want other people to understand why you use something like threes or why you use something like different spacing. It's not just convenience, right? It's a tool in your belt. It's why I was a little bit bothered when people were talking about you know, with the whole oh, what do you call it? Miles Morales, Spider-Verse, the first one, when they were using 2s and 3s with 3D animation. Really cool. And they're like, oh, well, the whole reason they did that was because at first it makes Miles look clumsy, right? And then he gets smoother as time goes on. It's like, okay, that's one of the reasons they used it in specific scenes and such. But they use it all over the place because it's a tool. You can apply it to all sorts of things. It's versatile, right? The versatility of it isn't just one note, right? And I want people to understand that. That way they can look at it and go, oh, I see how that works. That's really cool. And it gives more to the experience. I don't think understanding how the art is made is strictly for the artist. I think it's for the audience as well. It's just that veil has sort of been demanded more and more and more, I suppose, as time has gone on, somewhat maybe perhaps due to CG, more of the mentality behind CG, where it's very easy now to throw just a ton of resources at CG and sort of I guess you could call over polishing products and such. And so it kind of removes this element of recognition, right? Recognizing like how something's done or what have you. And that was sort of the goal, even during the days of practical effects. You wanted to make it thorough, right? A thorough experience to sell, like, oh, this spaceship is in space, right? For example. But I also think that there was an element to it. It was that striving for it, right? Well, now we can do that. Now we can actually have photorealism of whatever we want. We've crossed that threshold, and so we're beginning to see where the veil begins and ends, right? And I think that that's important to recognize. Even like on the subject of CGI, I've been thinking about like the look of old PC games, like one in particular, in the form of like the Myst games, if you've ever played Myst or Riven or Myst 3 Exile or what have you. The CGI in those games, I love the look of those games. It's such a distinctive look. I would love more movies to look like that, right? It's not photorealistic. It's not meant to be like, oh, this is right in front of it. It's meant to take you to another world, literally, right? In the form of the gameplay, with traveling through the ages and everything like that. And obviously, it was probably just purely born out of this necessity, right? Computers back in the 90s and everything like that. But it gives such a distinct look. Makinero Nectar, yeah. Been right about it. As an artist, my taste has been refined thanks to learning about craft behind this or that medium. Exactly, right? That's why I think sharing about the process is so important. Because I think that people do appreciate that when they learn about it. It's like, oh man, that's what I've been really seeing with my students. Like the ones who become interested in animation and start learning about it. Now they can kind of recognize the effort that goes into something. They have a deeper appreciation of just the nature of making art, right? And the process and everything like that. And I think that's really important, just in general. And I think that that's something that should be promoted to everyone. I think everyone can have their way of appreciating it, right? That's the wonderful thing about it. But homogenization, that's not the way. Oops. Okay. Exactly, yeah. Yeah, no, there's craft to it, right? Now, what was interesting, I got to talking with my brother, and there is an aspect where if it's pure craft, it's an interesting balance. It's very interesting, but it can be kind of, when the craft itself can kind of also take over the art in a strange way. And a good example of that, I would argue, not that it's bad art necessarily, but there is, I feel, a detraction. But that would be like The Thief and the Cobbler. From a technical craft perspective, unbelievable. Probably one of the most, just the greatest works of animation, right? But because it's so self-absorbed within its own craft, it begins to fall in. It's kind of like the other end, right? It begins to kind of fall into similar traps, I feel, where it just detracts from the experience. So it's an important balance, and it's why collaboration is so important. It's why a vision unopposed can potentially make for a rather lackluster product in and of itself. Sometimes you need that extra word in edgewise to kind of get you to think about your work in a different light. So I was really happy when a couple of friends of mine, I know, Evelyn and Big Ultimate Kahuna, took a look at the comic, because now it's like, okay, I'm not just the only eyes on this, right? And other people had read it, but there was just kind of this, oh yeah, it was good, right? That was the extent of it. But I wanted someone to really look at this and try to figure it out, right? And see what happens. Is it working? Is it not? Is it like, what comes to mind? And there's a few things where I realized, I was like, oh yeah, that would come across that way, right? Things unintended, things that maybe shouldn't be like that. And so it's important to kind of have that perspective. So copy pasted blended and unique. Yeah. I agree. It's kind of funny. I fell out of fantasy for that reason. That sort of same reason. Because I realized it was like, this is all the same language, right? It's kind of the irony of making a magic system, right? The almost oxymoronish state of that, or oxymoronic rather, state of that, because it's like when you begin to so closely define magic. I mean, like, if go out and study how radio works. That's magic at that point, right? It's a whole system. You have to make these rods of iron or steel a specific length to tune it with frequencies, and pictures and sound can be transmitted. Like, it's magic, right? Like, at that point, that's magic. So magic becomes really stinking, like, not interesting when I can find more, like, fascination in the real world with real radio waves, you know, this almost arcane thing that we already have, and you're just kind of in this corner with your magic system, and oh, it just works this way, you know. You know, that's, I don't know, that to me is, that's boring, right? And I noticed that was kind of the way that a lot of fantasy approached itself, was, yeah, very samey, just like, well, this is how it is, you know, blah, blah, blah. It's why I like going out and finding, like, pre-Tolkien fantasy, pre-release of the Lord of the Rings art, right? Because when the Lord of the Rings came out, fantastic film, wonderful art direction, everything like that, but it set a precedence, it set a visual language that unfortunately has really understandably captivated the industry and just people in general, and really inspired a lot of people, but it also kind of just feels like it's kind of stuck it in a rut as well. And I want different things, and so it's fun going back to like old science fiction or old fantasy covers and seeing like, what were people thinking? What was the language back then? And there's patterns, you know, there's like styles of rendering and tropes and everything like that still, but they seem to cycle a little bit more, right? And it's, you know, it's different, so it's good to have, it's healthy to have kind of that broader spectrum. Eberron, magic punk. Eberron, I'm not familiar. I could go for some good. Is it Emberon or Emberon? Eberron, okay. Eberron. Let's see. D&D related then? Complexity of even simple computer gates. Yeah, I mean that's the other funny thing about it, is how old some of the concepts behind radio or even like data structure and stuff like that, how old some of that stuff is. These people were don't let it being D&D to scare you. I was just curious. It's like funny enough, actually, I was in a thrift store. I should have picked it up. I would have been really curious. And I was looking through the books. I was just all the different books and stuff like that. And I was curious about just seeing what I could find. And I came across Gary Gygax. And it was, I don't think it was D&D related, but it was a fantasy book. And I said, wow, what is a Gary Gygax like, right? Like what was his writing like? No idea if it was any good. But certainly, you know, he, for those who don't know, Gary Gygax was one of the minds behind D&D, the original, back in like the 70s or whenever it was started. I was like, man, that'd be kind of fun. Like, we're like kind of get back to that root. Like, what was his thinking of fantasy and stuff like that? I should have picked it up. Maybe next time I go, if I see it again, I'll grab it and just see. I think that'd be kind of funny. See if it's any good. But yeah, no, I don't know. Maybe I'll keep an eye out for this one. I can see what you're saying, the Magic Punk with like the kind of the look of it, even on the cover. But yeah, like I was saying, the math behind some of the concepts, like what is it, phase shift lock or something like that, was they were coming up with the math for it in like the 1800s. They just didn't have the technology to actually make use of it. It's very fascinating how far back concepts go, right? People were sitting down and just like figuring all this stuff out. It was just like, well, one of these days, this will be useful. They realized the potential, they just didn't have the means to it. Maybe, and actually, maybe they didn't fully realize the potential, but it was still an intriguing concept. There's a really good series by James Burke, who wrote a good number of books on physics, good grief, physics and the history of the universe and things like that. It's called Connections. It's a very interesting, it was started in the 70s, and the last series was finished in the 90s, last season. It's 3 seasons long. The first one's the best, but yeah, so it started in the 70s, and it's an honest look at technology and how we got to where we are. Through a lens that's very unique, actually. Like, for example, in one of the episodes, he's looking at computer. It's a computer that can track when a satellite is passing overhead. And so he's like, okay, we have this extremely complicated little box here that can track when a device well above our heads passes over us. How did we get there? And he starts in Rome with a system that was developed to process things like wheat. Basically a mill is what it was. And it used pegs to actuate devices, hammers, and different things like that, right? To transfer power into a way that would allow it to process this stuff. Well, that right there, that's the bare bones components of a computer. That's all a computer does. It processes, something comes in, something else comes out, right? So going back even that, there are these base elemental factors that were developed to lay the foundations for what would eventually become the computer. All the way back then, 2,000 years ago. And he traces it through history. How did this kind of inspire this? Where did other ideas come from? Things like that, right? Rather than being like, well, first this came along, then this came along, then this came along. In this very linear fashion, it was, well, what's the awkward road that this all took to get here? Very interesting series. I highly recommend it. Very insightful. Little outdated perhaps nowadays, but in a strange way, that actually kind of is to its point, I guess. Because the idea is, though, the world's still moving, right? And we are so far removed from where we come from now, right? And so it's still relevant in that regard, especially nowadays with the type of technology that's cropping up. But it is really funny, these concepts of artificial, quote unquote, artificial intelligence have been around since the 50s. That kind of thing has been worked on and developed since the dawn of computers, basically. Now, obviously, our processing power is magnitudes higher than what was initially conceptualized and what was utilized. But that premise was thought about very thoroughly back then. and explored quite a lot. So it's kind of funny that it is a new invention, as it were, but it's also treading this old ground. The 50s and to the 70s, yeah, or the 80s, yeah. Oh yeah, oh man, I finally watched a video. Speaking of time dilation and all that kind of stuff, I finally watched. What is that? What are you? Oh, that's actually the leg. I see. Okay. I finally watched a video that actually explained time dilation in a way that made sense. I can't fully remember it, but I remember it making sense. Because I had been trying to wrap my head around like special relativity and all that kind of stuff for years. To really understand, okay, what does the curvature of space mean? What does, does moving in this fashion dilate space and everything like that? Like, how does that actually change time? And very fascinating. It was a really interesting look, probably simplified in its structure, but regardless, it actually was like, okay, now I'm beginning to kind of wrap my head around it. And the analogy revolved around if you turn slightly sideways to your point of origin, like your original ray that you're walking, your time dilates basically, right? Within a two-dimensional field. But it has to do with it being a dimension on top of the spatial ones. Yes, in a sense, yes. But like you can say that, but man, like it was like, okay, what does that mean, right? that was the struggle. That was the really hard part. And so that video kind of explained, okay, well, what does that mean? Well, if we look at it through the lens of space, right, of dimension, then we can kind of create a model based on the dimensions that we do understand, the second and the third dimension, for example. So within the third dimension, right, or within the second dimension, or rather, okay, yeah, within the third dimension, if you turn on your axis, within the second dimension, you are now changing essentially the time it takes for you to pass through a space, right? And you are moving differently, but you don't see it within the second dimension. You only see it within the third dimension. Yeah. And so it was like, okay, that's interesting. And but I can't remember how it tied back entirely. Like, okay, how does this dimension relate? And it's a specific way. And it's like, oh, that's it. That's the mechanism, right? It's wrapping your head around those mechanisms. Very cool though. I was really happy when I was like, oh, hey, it slightly makes more sense. That would be interesting. I've always kind of wondered that. I'm still trying to kind of wrap my head around the structure of fourth dimension and stuff like that. Where is... It's not this one. It's... Yes, it is. Okay. Oops. I forgot. Do that. Because I get the feeling that all of those games that are like, oh, we made a fourth dimensional game, right? And stuff like that. It's like, from a technical standpoint, yes, but you're also just kind of faking it. I guess in a similar way that you fake it when you fake a 3D game, though, right? Because technically it's not 3D, it's just projection mapping, essentially. Which that was I watched a really interesting video on that where it was how to basically project 3D, the math behind projecting 3D, and the matrices behind that. Matrices are something I was never actually taught, so it's a little bit foreign to me. But man, like, it's just unbelievable how clever it is and how all this math that's been developed over centuries like, kind of comes together. It's like, wow. Then shrink again. Yeah, similar to in 2D flipping a paper sideways. During your diploma studies. So did you do forgot it all, yeah. So now I'm kind of curious what you're studying. Because you seem like you have a lot of just like you touch on a lot of different subjects and such. I feel like I remember you talking that you studied language a while back. I think that was you. Characters in it won't be able to see behind it, but you can from your 3D perspective, yeah. Practical engineers, electronics. Okay. That makes a lot of sense, actually. I've looked a little bit into basics of electrical engineering just for like some stuff on soldering and whatnot, though I am very... It's not my department. Fascinating, though. Oh, my word. Really cool stuff. Recalling a bit. Oh, I see. Autodidact. I'm not sure I'm familiar with that term. If I were to, let's see, didact. Auto, self. Okay, I see. So you study languages on your own. Okay. That's my guess anyway. It's kind of what my brother does as well. So he's shared a lot with me in regards to history of languages and such. I see. I should brush up on Latin. Very useful to know. What time is it? Oops. Yeah, whatever. There. Oops. I really ought to lock that layer, although it is nice being able to make adjustments. Honestly, I actually, as far as electrical engineering goes, I actually need to do a little bit of engineering for some antennas I want to build, particularly for TV tuning. I want to figure out a monopole design that will tune itself to, that'll be specifically designed for channel 4, which is, shoot, what's the frequency range? I can't remember what the frequency range is. I think it winds up being like 3 feet long, but if I coil load it and do a few other things, I think I can shrink it down pretty significantly. It's been fun looking into like how antennas are designed. And like I said, like it's straight up magic. It's so cool. And it really made me realize that one of the biggest deficiencies behind magic systems as well is that so often everything is understood about that magic system. It's just sort of something you do, right? That's how it feels so often. It's not an exploration of an actual like system within the world in the same way that we explore physics or radio or what have you. Yeah. Reception all the time. Yeah, I'm going probably with a monopole design. Just because I should be able to get away with it. I'm not going to be demanding really good reception or anything like that of it. It's mostly just an experiment. But I have a headset I've been putting together that uses a hacked viewfinder as a screen, and then I have a TV tuner hooked up to it. It has composite input. I have a TV tuner hooked up to it on a pair of headphones, so it's like it's a heads-up display kind of thing, and then I can transmit to it using television signals. So it'd be pretty fun to I need to finish that project. It's not finished yet, but pretty fun project. I learned a lot working on it, which was cool. Not antennas. Interesting. Huh. Yeah, I'm not super... It's kind of funny. I'm kind of stuck in, like, some older... I'm stuck in older tech. I mostly do stuff with older tech now. And so I don't really... I have no idea how modern machines are designed. I know that they're probably too complicated for their own good. They're definitely too complicated for my good. Modern machines are magic. I mean, man, it's just crazy how small they are now. Like everything. It's just wild. Unfortunately, though, what that means is that they're so specific to their design that it's like, good luck repairing it, you know? You would, not only would you need to know, like, really in-depth sense of like computer science, but actually it would be but you would have to have like the machines just to see it, right? Micro soldering units and whatnot. Yeah, good luck. I mean, that's even a problem for like older cars. You know, the computers in older cars give out. It's like, oh, good luck, you know. We're talking cars from like the 80s and whatnot. A little bit of a shame. Because everything else is fine, but you know, the computer gave out. And all of those are going to start, you know, degrading and giving out, so no way you can really find a replacement. Yeah, honestly, like, oh my word. Software gunk is the right word. It's crazy. Ah. Her hair. Actually, what Intel giveth, Microsoft taketh away. Oh my gosh. Reiser, who in the preface to his book on the Oberon system. Oberon. I know the name Oberon. Where have I heard Oberon? Hope is that the progress in hardware will cure all software ills. Yeah. Oh my gosh. However, a critical observer may observe the software manages to outgrow hardware in size and sluggishness. Sometime before, indeed, and the trend. Oberon, King of the Fairy, yes, or King of the Fairies, yeah. Trend was becoming obvious as early as 1987. Yeah. Well, and that's wow, that's funny to think. 1987. Nowadays, it's like. It just reminds me of videos I've seen where, like, you know, someone's playing a game, I think like The Division or whatever, and the guy starts freaking out and is like, okay, just to be clear, it starts lagging, right? It's like, just to be clear, I'm running 3 Titans in this thing at the same time. Why is it slowing down? Like, well, it looks like someone forgot to, oh, yeah. Looks like someone, didn't really take the time to, optimize. Actually, you know, I don't swap it. Oh, come on, YouTube. Titanium and the Queen. Yes. That does, yeah, that's familiar. Where There we go. Honestly, her pupils should probably be more dilated. Oh well. Alright. I'll probably just do one page tonight. But yeah, honestly, like, so I've been watching a guy by the name of Kaze Emanuel on YouTube. I think his name's Kaze. I've heard it pronounced Kaze, I've heard it pronounced Kaze, so I go with Kaze. But he's been essentially taking the N64 to its limits. And yeah, it's pretty awesome to see a machine just optimized as far as it'll go. Just understanding the internal workings of the RAM bus and just the bare metal of the machine. It's just really cool. Because I've always been kind of curious, like, where is the line between hardware limitation and programming knowledge, like where we're at as programmers, or the tools that we have, right? Like, what could you essentially recreate on an older console as far as like modern games go and whatnot. Yeah, whatever. Maybe she was just really thorough. All right. All right. And this dude's face. I am really happy with how he turned out. His design. It's fun. It's awesome to think like how long ago I designed this guy. Like, it was like 3 years ago that I actually no, I think it was like 4 years ago now that I first drew this guy. So, really fun getting to integrate him. There was another guy who was pushing the N64. There's a few people, but there was another guy who was making Portal on the N64. Unfortunately, though, he had to stop it because I think his eyes are white. Essentially, he got into a call with Valve, who initially were really supportive of the project, but unfortunately, because he was using proprietary libraries to Nintendo and not open libraries, there was no way that they could back it, and they basically had to cease and desist him, unfortunately. bit of a shame, to be honest, but it was understandable. Like, he didn't have any hard feelings or anything like that, because it's like, they're like, oh jeez, we would be in such hot water if we tried to back this, and it would put the project at risk. If he had gone with like an open, because there are open libraries for developing for the N64, funny enough, but he didn't use them, unfortunately. But if he had, he would have been more than likely fine, but yeah. It was still a pretty cool project to catch our nerve again, though. Very impressive. The color I want. That's not entirely the perfect color that I want. Oh man, the other project I'm super excited about, though, as far as decomps go, is people have been decompiling Jak and Daxter. They've gotten through, I mean, there's still stuff to work on, but they've more or less gotten through Jak 1 and Jak 2. And now they're moved on to Jak 3. And I'm just super excited for like the modding potential that will come out of that. It's like, yes, because doggone do I want more Jak and Daxter. Like, good Jak and Daxter. I got it. Truth be told, I'm definitely more interested in like original Jak and Daxter stuff, rather than like Jak 2 or Jak 3, just because that's the one I grew up with. And I'm gonna be honest, I think that it's the best of the series. But that's been pretty cool following that, messing around with it. It is a pretty extreme scar, but is it that extreme? Let me try. I like that better. I'm actually going to go back here. Yeah. And then as far as mouth, actually, I think I could have gone with. This is also going to be in this color. Might need to fix that up. I don't know why I did that. Let's see. Alright, I'm not going to start another song here because we're going to be wrapping up. We're going to wrap up. We're going to call it a day. We got a page done. We got a bit done, which makes me happy. So we're back on schedule-ish. Oh, one more thing. Oh, right. Oh. I might change this color up a bit more. Not entirely sure if that's the color I want to go with, but it'll do for now. There's a couple colors I might need to change out for the sake of readability. Okay. Yeah, I might just real quick. Yeah. I'll keep messing with it. Okay. Anyway. Yeah, that's what he looks like. Then we're going to do the next page. Probably work on that tomorrow. This one will be simple enough, so I'll probably... This one will be a little bit of work, but not too terrible, especially considering. This one will be a bit of work, but not too terrible again. So I should be able to crank through the rest of these pages pretty quick. And then I'll be doing the backgrounds. And that should hopefully go quick once I figure out what I'm going to do with them. And yeah. Anyway, it's time to wrap up. I'll catch you guys later. Thank you so much for stopping by. It was a really good time. I'll catch you later. I'll catch you on Thursday, hopefully, if I'm feeling up for it. I should be. So, yeah. See ya.